Hello, today is June 26th, 2018. This is the normal SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. Today, what we had planned originally was to go through the 112 planning document, which I'll share in a second. But before we start to do that, are there other topics that folks who are here in this group would like to discuss? Anything with 111, any remaining items or anything like that? All right, if not, let's, hopefully folks can see my screen. I'm hoping they can. Let's start to get into this. Let me share this doc link. It should be already in the email that I sent a while ago. And I'll share it in chat for folks to join. If you could add your details onto that doc, that would be helpful. So it should be anybody who has a link should have access. So I was thinking we could just start from the top down and walk through some of the items. And if there are things that are missing that folks want to address, feel free to add to the doc, right? And we can please append to the end though, so we can start to, just at least have some order to how we're talking about stuff. I think the first thing that I'd like to discuss, because it's not finished for 112, is to talk about the docs. Is there someone who's going to take point, or should we just open a bunch of issues and have at it with regards to the overall docs structuring and cleaning up of the docs for the 112 cycle?
So I can coordinate that with Jennifer. I think she's taking the initiative on the actual restructuring, to my understanding. Like, she is going to move files and folders around. That's my understanding. But I guess I can help with if she wants me to send pull requests about that.
More, yeah. I guess at least two persons, preferably more.
I mean, there's also the one thing that we did in the docs that we haven't completed is cleaning up the kubeadm repo to be the canonical state of features and details that aren't in the main documentation that people ask questions about, but really should not live in the main documentation. These are people who are like power users who want to go off on their own land. And we want to be able to point them at a proper location, but we also don't want to confuse or put it in the main doc so that way, they kind of could basically shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, that is a different. I think that needs a dedicated owner or like section of yes, please. Developer facing docs. Well, power user, yeah. As you might have heard already, I have no idea of how much I'm able to do the next 3 or 4 cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll just see with my military service how friendly they are to open source and whatnot permissions to leave. But yeah, Fabrizio has done some work here. Maybe is he on the call?
It'd be nice to have somebody who's on point for some of these things. A person who, like, as the release goes by, we have a person we can poke at periodically. Ideally, it'd be like a buddy system, right? So
Yeah.
like a person could go away for a period of time and then come back.
So if I'm on vacation or something, I can definitely say I'm going to be away for a couple of days or something like that. So I'm not sure about the whole initiative. I guess we like decided some things in the previous meeting, but I think we we need more to discuss more here. And I'm considering like making a one-on-one with Jennifer if she agrees, of course. Perhaps Tim, if you join as well. To like, I need like a direction for the movement of files between folders. Like, okay, we're gonna move this from here to here, and we are going to include this new stuff in the file. We need details about the new structure.
Well, that's for the upstream portion of the docs, but this is specifically the second item down below, and I can be here too on the main one. I can jump on both of these here. Why don't we just move on to the next item, because that's going to be the one that's more interesting. Asking for volunteers to help documentation can always be like, anybody, Bueller. All right,
Yeah.
next stuff. Config. It's basically kubeadm to GA. What are the items that we've as a SIG feel are the action items that we think are required in order for us to get kubeadm to GA? Obviously, getting the config apparatus to be v1 beta 1 at least is important. So comments, questions there?
Yeah, is there a like a known path to get to v1 beta 1? Is there like a cap out for what we want to change in config? Or is this just a renaming thing?
I would prefer to have a cap that outlines the details of the changes we would like to have. I think we played a little fast and loose. Not a little. We played very fast and loose in the 1.11 cycle. And I think we should be much more strict as we start to approach GA. So that way it's clear what's been decided. So anybody can take a look at it and understand.
Yeah. And why that happened is like we were short on time as I joined mid cycle and just had to start coding. I have a fairly good roadmap, or I think I have a pretty good roadmap in my head, and that's the problem. So how to actually get all the thoughts and like ideas down on paper is something I don't know how it's gonna exactly happen. If we could have some, I mean, we had a really good some kubeadm office hours meeting where I just went through the doc on the API types, and we sat down, discussed them. Something like that with regards to writing a KEP, and maybe someone else writing the KEP actually would be the most proactive.
I think we could group write the KEP and just iterate the list. I mean, we should start with some of the canonical items that are part of the list here, right?
Yeah.
Inside of the planning document, and then either I could happily do it tomorrow as part of the kubeadm office hours too.
Yeah, something like that would be great. Because while looking realistically at the time I have, I'm probably not going to be able to write very many KEPs before I go. It's like less than 2 weeks before I have to be in service. So but like having a few, I can do more than just these normal. I mean, we can put in specialized meetings just for writing down caps while I'm still here. So from the top of my head, remove the version 1 of one API. I actually have a PR for that already, or I haven't published, but locally that I just to get push away. Create a new version 1 beta 1 API. Locally, I've just made that version 1 of a tree. And we can just rename it late in the cycle if we feel confident enough for it to be beta. In the worst case, it's just going to land as version 1 alpha 3. Then, as Fabrizio and Mike Torfen and others in the SIG had very legit comments on embedding other component config versus having them in different files or different YAML documents. I'm kind of convinced that is what we should do. So our master configuration file, or like our kubeadm configuration file, is one. There's first one YAML document with the init or master configuration, whatever we call it. Then we have the kubelet configuration, kubeproxy configuration, API server configuration, whatever. The other ones are optional, of course. But if the user wants them, and as new component configs are available, we can just have them in the same file but different YAML documents. I also have some work in progress there locally.
Do you have a link to the conversation piece or the PR or the issue?
Yeah, it's one of the.
I'll just add it as a to-do here, right? And just.
Yeah. Cool. So it was. Some of the discussion was on the. If you have the version 1 beta 1 types document, API type documents in Google Docs, there was also some discussion there. Version 1 beta 1.
So
we really have to.
Would that basically be creating the config map that the component config is going to be landing in, or is this going to be different than that?
It's embedding. It's just separating out the structure, I think.
So yeah, I mean, if we have one file with 3 different YAML documents, one for the kubeadm configuration, one for the base kubelet configuration, and one for the base kubeproxy configuration, then config in the kubeadm global struct may or will affect the kubelet's component configuration, like we have now. So if you set the service subnet of the whole cluster for the whole cluster in kubeadm config, it will also set the DNS IP in the kubelet component configuration if you haven't already overridden it to something else. So that's like an example, and then yes, there will be 3 different config maps.
So this is like more flexible for the user, but more difficult to maintain at the same time?
How would it be more difficult to maintain?
Because of the separate files, I mean.
When they are in cluster, or?
Yeah, when the user is starting the cluster, he has to have the separate files, to my understanding.
No, so everything can be in the same file. And the only thing, the user ever only has one file that he is like kubectl applying, basically with kubeadm upgrade apply.
Because I saw discussions that in the master config there should be like a path to a separate file for some.
Oh no, yeah, no. Instead we're just gonna do YAML documents So,
Why don't we table this conversation and go to it at another?
I didn't want to dive into it, but yeah.
Yeah, let's add a link, and then we can have a discussion on the details and logistics of just that one. The next one is make the kube proxy component config to v1 beta 1, and my comment there is, who's going to drive that? Because that's out of our hands, right? That's the kube proxy.
Yeah.
No one. That was one of the problems, that like no one currently owns it. So the only drivers for making that change would be us, getting out a hot eye poker for the SIG network folks and just constantly jabbing at them. Because without an owner there, which there is none, we would have to drive that change. And we do know that there's a bunch of issues like the host name override that requires attention.
Can I ask why that blocks kubeadm doing it if we're splitting component configs out?
It's still there, and we're still dependent upon it.
So I mean, if we accept an alpha config and then write the alpha config to a config map.
Are you putting the config in v1 in your kubeadm v1 beta 1 structure?
No, but we're thinking for kubeadm generally to go GA, we don't want to use alpha features. But yeah, it's a kind of a high bar, but yes.
Yeah, so there's a difference between the structure going v1 beta 1 and kubeadm going GA, I guess.
Yeah. This is more. Yeah, this is config related, but more kubeadm to GA. We don't want to use alpha features.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Could actually move it. So yeah, and yeah, cluster API, HA capabilities, all that will need to be taken into account.
Can someone speak to the make flags override config values? Is that?
Yeah, that was me.
We currently don't do that?
No. Currently, we have flags and configs mutually exclusive.
Okay.
So either you do only config or you only flags. But that is, we can make that work. Mike Toffen has like even like instructions on exactly how to do it, because the kubelet and others, all the kubelet does it. kubeproxy doesn't, so that was the problem.
Is this something I just wonder some edge cases that I can come up with, like if you have the same flag by accident as a flag and in the config, then which one takes precedence over the other and the expected outcome that the user might expect?
So the expected, so you have one config file. kubeadm accepts that config file, uses all the instructions, but if you specify, so you have a config of full with options, and then you specify node name on the CLI, because node name is different per host that you're running on, but the config file is like, then it's gonna, the CLI flag is gonna override the node name value in the config. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, the functionality makes sense. Just from UX perspective,
I think it's pretty canonical that flags typically override the config file because it is an immediate user action.
Yeah,
that's the last thing that gets set. But, yeah, so we should ensure that that happens.
Yeah, we've had like 5 or something, 5 to 10 different issues about this, from users being confused about them being mutually exclusive. So I mean, it's not P0, but it would be a good thing to have on the radar as like functionality you can rely on for GA.
I do think, yeah, this is pretty non sequitur. I think we can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
The HA capabilities. Is Fabrizio on? He was on earlier. I don't know if he can talk right now or not. But I absolutely do think we need to add, yeah, I do absolutely do think we need to add, you already added the multiple master configurations as the list, which is highly useful for the master join workflow. But also adding the capabilities similar to how the, it was a TPR at the time, similar to how the TPR was structured for the external etcd for the operator, but just taking the key bits of the pieces we need for deployment configuration and baking that into the etcd configuration. I do think there's a couple of minor tweaks that need to be done to make sure that that's clean. So that way, as we do a master join workflow, we could eventually, for a stack master situation, just add the etcd member along with it. I do think that's a common user story that we would like to optimize for.
I have earlier just like prototyped and thought about what we might do with HA, but I haven't synced up with Fabrizio and you other guys on what's actually being coded so far and what the actual proposal is. So looking forward to do that.
The one question I still have is, with regard to self-hosting, I'm of the opinion now at this point, after going through the circle many, many times, is that I am not a fan of almost every single incantation of self-hosted control planes. And I do realize it has some benefits, but I don't think there's anything we can't do currently with eliminating that. And if we eliminate that, that makes the workflow, the code, everything else about the master join workflow way cleaner. Because right now there's support for dual scenarios. And I'm not a fan.
Alpha for self-hosting, but yes.
Without a production owner for a feature set around self-hosting, which there are quite a few people who do run self-hosting in production, like Ocado Technologies, but if they're on help us keep up with issues, I don't think that we should be spending any more cycles on time.
If my high school experience working at a drive-through helped me, I think I parsed what you said, and I kind of agree. I don't think we should be spending more time on it because there isn't somebody to drive it through to completion, and it's full of peril. And the people who have done it before basically tried many different incantations for doing aspects of it, and it all comes with these caveats. And I think we can optimize. The biggest benefit that everyone was touting was upgrade scenarios, and there's nothing that prevents us from having a daemon set pod of kubeadm that basically does a rolling upgrade deployment in a cleaner fashion.
Yeah, and I mean, Mike from the Ocado cluster team even told me that they actually switched over to kubeadm for bootstrapping their manifests. And then they make small modifications to them and then run them in a self-hosted manner themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's nothing that there's nothing preventing you from like pivoting on your own, right? If you really care that much to do it that way, you can have your own pivot semantics. And for HA, it's a lot less dangerous, right? The problem that we always got hung up around the axle when we're trying to deal with how do we deal with a degenerative case of the single master, right? And then it becomes really that's the degenerative case where we have to deal with DC outages and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I would welcome them checking in their runbooks and that kind of stuff into the Kubedium repo as a starting point for people to, develop a community around those kinds of solutions. So,
but I think it simplifies the workflow a lot. And I know I originally reviewed Fabrizio's PR, and I'm like, why are we doing dual scenarios for master join workflow? It became odd. And I think if we simplify it, it simplifies everything else too.
So yeah, I've also started thinking about like the scope, more detail on the scope of kubeadmin. And if the initial thought was like, okay, we have some OS underneath. We execute a command to get a master. We then execute a command on another node, on another machine to get a node. If we then want to upgrade any of these, we execute another command. And for me, it's fully, after like thinking more, it's fully reasonable to execute one command per master. Instead of what self-hosting would gain, but as you said, you can do that with a daemon set as well, is like just execute once against the cluster that would upgrade all masters. But when thinking about certificate rotation on those masters, it gets really tricky as well. Because like if we want to rotate the API server serving certs at the same time of doing an upgrade, we can't really do that easily with self-hosting. And we need this like daemon set function anyway, then, so which can be done with plain static pod hosted. So, and we don't have that much coverage. So I think it's fully reasonable to say, if you have 3 masters, run one command per master to upgrade. And people probably want to do that anyway with regards to load balances and like, okay, now I take this 3rd master down for maintenance, do the upgrade, just use the 2 others. When done, switch over, go to the next one. Instead of having like this all or nothing switch, which can be
it could both
surprising.
Be powerful and dangerous at the same time.
Yeah, exactly, and surprising.
It's a ginormous foot gun, and like it could either be great, and you can less double taps, or you could just blast off your own leg.
Yeah,
and I'm a fan of just making it explicit and simple, and it simplifies the code.
Yep.
And we can defer to other technologies to start to do that abstraction layer for upgrades, making them more seamless. So I think if you manage things through Cluster API, you could have another abstraction layer which could allow you to do it in a much more seamless way.
Exactly. I also like the thinking of doing the whatever GitOps or like controller model like sync like the rest of Kubernetes, using the cluster API for these. Just change one knob and the cluster will roll out its upgrade itself stuff, rather than saying to kubeadm and making kubeadm the owner of upgrading everything even in HA modes, just like that. So yeah,
I agree. So I think we've beaten that horse. Are there any questions, comments, complaints, concerns on it?
Just on etcd in general, I would like I know we're very focused on kubeadm in this at the moment in this doc, but I would like to propose the manager work, sort of see if we like that and see if we're willing to make it a SIG repository under this particular SIG. So that might actually help some of this. But we can talk about that at the end.
Yeah. I'm totally fine with, if there are people who are going to take ownership of it. I think the one problem we've kind of had as a community is we have a lot of good ideas and then they bear rot. And if there are people who are like yourself who are going to own, maintain, and track and upgrade and integrate, then I have no qualms with that at all.
Awesome.
Me neither. I think that sounds really good. And having, it's definitely like kind of Kubernetes focused at the moment. But like it's not because we don't want any other project. It's just that we want to get this done first and like then focus on other problems, like for myself at least. But if people are like yourself wanna do etcd manager, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I will get it integrated into kubeadm so that there's a nice
Yeah, exactly. It would be great.
I think the next thing on the list was rationalize with Cluster API. I know that we started to do pieces of this, and there's overlap between the configuration for kubeadm and some of the API constructs for the Cluster API, such as machines and how machines join. And I kind of prefer if there was a way for them to leverage some of the configuration apparatus. So I know they want to be abstracted from all deployment scenarios, but the whole purpose of making kubeadm the core nugget is that other installers could use that nugget along the way, right? That was kind of the premise, right? And there are pieces that exist inside of the Cluster API, which I do think are redundant, such as like the taint apparatus for initialization. I don't know, are there thoughts there?
I think that might actually be being removed as we speak, or at least being put into the provider-specific space. So
the provider config, yeah, that makes sense because it would be part of the provider config that be passed down through to kubeadm, right? Or other tools.
Yes, it would. Yes, I think also it was the notion that it wasn't that we. I don't know. We'll see. Certainly roles are being removed, and I thought taints were being removed as well. But I will try to figure out. I'll look right now.
Okay.
Cool. So I'm looking at the cluster spec right now, and it's kind of completely empty. It has cluster network. Now I'm talking about like the full cluster view. It has cluster network with services and pods, service domain. That we should probably make that align because we have exactly similar kind of networking struct with that is called networking, and it has service subnet as a string, I think, and pod subnet as a string, and service domain we call DNS domain. So just unifying that would be nice to use the same spec, but otherwise I don't know. I mean, there's going to be a bit different scope anyway. I mean, make it as similar as possible, but still we will have, there will be differences with that.
There absolutely will. I think what we're saying is that Heptio as a company, we're going to throw down on Cluster API pretty heavily in 1.12, and rationalizing these two makes sense, right? So so we'll try to help drive that. I just want to put that as a feature item for us to address going forwards, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to have redundancy of the same flags and features percolate all the way through. Because like from an operator perspective, even from developer perspective, like how many different places do I need to like log my TPS reports inside of this configuration structure in order for me to get something through to make it make sense, right?
Yeah, it's unclear to me also, maybe Justin has more context, how we're gonna configure, like for example, the API server, and or if that's out of scope, is configuring the API server, controller manager, scheduler, proxy, kubelets, whatnot, in scope or out of scope for the cluster API? Because that is essentially what Kubernetes is all about doing.
It's out of scope from what I see.
Yeah, I think it's out of scope from the API, but so each implementation would define how they intend to do it.
Yeah. So the provider config, which is the general thunk, gets passed through, and that provider config would then be the override that I see.
Well, or it's external entirely.
Sure. That too. Yeah. But if you wanted to have a single declarative way, you would be passed through, right? But yes.
I think it's because of these arguments that we haven't put it in the API that we can see which one works better.
Yeah, I don't have strong opinions, but
but thinking of a what should I say, 100% vanilla thing that deploys cluster API on your bare metal machines using Terraform or whatever, it would look something like the normal cluster API, have a tool for it, talk to Terraform to your nodes, and then check in the full kubeadm config with all the YAML documents and all the stuff in provider config. Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Of course, if you're let's say I want to make a GKE cluster, then GKE actually tell me exactly what I can specify and what I can't specify. So that is another thing. But if we assume we have full control using kubeadm in it. Cool. Move phases to init. I have a couple of other things as well we might want to do for 112. I've looked into this. If we can get it, that is okay, but it's probably the first time I think it's gonna how should I say, I'm not entirely positive we can do this in one cycle, is what I'm trying to say.
The phases
not
to
phases. Yes, I'm a bit skeptical of actually can make that happen in a good way, given the other tasks we're going to focus on.
So something I saw here about moving phases to init is that one of the phases is the kubelet phase, and both init and join are used in it. Do we want to move this to the init command as well?
Say that again one more time.
I think the whole idea is that actually we will have sub commands under init or under join, in which you can access the phase executions, like the ad hoc ones. The alpha phases command is going to be broken out for UX into init and join. So this is not changing the directory structure of the Kubernetes code base. It's changing the CLI structure. Does that make sense?
It might change the directory structure slightly, but yeah.
You can access them from both init and join, I see.
Yeah, so the whole purpose behind that was that it is confusing from a UX perspective when you are, it makes a lot more sense to say kubeadm init certs, right? It's clear from a UX what you're doing versus kubeadm alpha, blah, 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 blah certs, right?
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, it all depends on what kind of scope we wanna set here. Like if it's a purely CLI change, or if it's like a more, I mean, kubeadm internally, we have you seen Mike Denise's task executor stuff? Justin, by the way, while you're here, you said you had some kind of task executor in COPS. Could you link to the source code?
I will. Yes. Which is there a particular bit you want to see? The executor itself, or
the executor and the units or whatever you call them, the definition of the units.
I'll put two links in the chat.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so it also kind of depends on whether we want to do something more modular. Like, for example, now we have every phase is a snowflake, and that is bad. Like code-wise inside of KubeADM. So if I guess that if we want to do this, we might want to wait for the refactoring of that before, and that is going to take time. I don't know if we actually want to do that, but it might be that if we don't, we will lose some of the overview or like easily introduce bugs or even more overhead due to the application. So I'm just a bit worried, or like I would really like us to have something like a task executor, and then we would have a generic struct or whatever that is called phase or interface or whatever, that we can just say that KubeADM init should run these 13 different phases, and then the task executor will just go ahead and async.
I'm not going to buy into all of that yet without seeing deets, right? Like, I want details before I'd buy into it. I can see a path forward that is much more sane for us, that is traditional. I do realize I have seen the code structure of the way it is today, but what you're proposing is also on the opposite end of super generic spectrum. So I think there's a happy ground in the middle that we could potentially go with. But I think before we do this work, we should have a proposal. And I think maybe defining a precursor for all of these major items is that we do proposals on them and we agree. And although we're kind of hashing out ideas here in this forum, I think before we execute on major changes that are major work items here, we should absolutely have a proposal in place, and we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's before we get underway. Does that seem like a fair statement?
Absolutely, yes. And my statement was just to like say that I'm not like 100% positive at this moment that we should start coding and checking in code.
Yes, I'm 100%. We should not do that.
Yeah,
opposite. That's the exact opposite of what we should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. That was just what I tried to say. That we might want to do something else, or maybe this just as is.
Maybe we should add priorities like next to the items in the list eventually.
Yes, eventually. We'll try to go through the list first. Next up.
I will say the reason we did tasks in the canonical reason we did tasks in cups was it enables us to do retry logic. So without that, everything in the real world tends to be a little flaky. Whereas with that, we just write the task, and if it returns an error, it'll get run again. So who cares?
Yeah. I'm a fan of, because KubeADM is such a simple tool, or is meant to be like a simple tool, is that they can always rerun the command and it should be idempotent, right? I don't want to do retry logic inside of KubeADM.
Well, but the bash script, the problem is like with the, just all the retry in a bash script is just so painful, or getting, the hardest thing of CLOPS, the most risky thing of CLOPS is the bash script, which runs on AWS up, which downloads the Bootstrap Go program in a reliable way. And that's
I would much rather put this thing into like a provider specific cluster API controller or actuator, whatever you want to call it. So that way, that retry logic retries over there, and KubeADM is idempotent. But this is, again, we should take it.
Yeah. We should take it next time. But I'm not sure I agree with this. Okay. Initial master join workflow. Fabrizio, still here?
Here I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
So there was already a cap for this the initial master join workflow is part of what we were talking, team was talking before. So the goal is to streamline the creation of a second and third and so on master node, and so make it possible to create reliable upgrades on a chain master. So the goal is to streamline what people are doing today by invoking kubeadmin several times and then changing manually some config here and there. So the proposal is there. I have already the update of the proposal. We can simplify even more by removing support for supporting or not. The missing part there is that now the proposal assumes that we have an external etcd and doesn't scale up or down etcd. So the work on my side is nearly completed. I think that this is an interesting user story for the users, for the final users. So in my opinion, should be in for GA.
I think we can probably mark it as alpha, but still be in for GA because it'll affect the initial flow. And I think we should probably put that as an item or a note that at least initial alpha support, right, should be available.
Yeah, so I'm not sure we should say we, it all comes down to like, okay, every other task is done, but we don't have initial master join. Do we go GA with Kubernetes or not?
I think the master join workflow will affect the configuration structs, right? So unless you actually have all the details in your configuration structs before you go, we could say we can add things to beta, we just can't really remove things or change things. So I guess if you wanted to punt it out of the GA list, no, I don't know. I'm torn. I'd prefer to have something there because people will start to depend upon it. People will need it. It is something that people have been, it's the most commonly asked feature.
Yeah. We'll talk about more about that later, but in any case, I expect that that we would design, like, even though we don't have the code, we would design version 1 beta 1 to do all this stuff or to support this workflow that we're like trying to achieve. But anyway, I haven't caught up a lot, but I would really like to, if nothing else, like have some demo from Fabrizio or something someday here, or just like deep dive in what we're actually thinking, so I can provide feedback. Then
I can send the updated cap in 1 or 2 days, so we can discuss on the cap.
Cool.
And the code is nearly finished, so maybe also organize a demo next week.
Sounds great. So I'm already like terrified of this list, by the way. I think this list is probably bigger than we could accomplish in 112. So we should, perhaps next week we can prioritize this list. Go ahead, Justin.
I was just gonna speaking of which, let's throw 2 more things on. Let's throw etcd manager at the bottom, and I guess maybe I'm gonna look at add-on management as well again.
You are gonna look at add-on management?
Yeah, why not?
Sounds cool. Are you gonna do customize?
Yes.
Add-on is also part of the API. Add-on definition is part of the API.
We haven't decided that yet, though. It might or might not be. That's why we want to hear Justin's input as well. And know his plans.
I think, yes. I think I agree with you, but also there is a flying PR, I guess it is merged today, that add to the API flags for choosing if installing Kube proxy or not.
Was it merged, so, you say?
I think I checked it before. I didn't see now in my PR dashboard, so I guess it is merged.
Okay, I would like to review all config changes at this point before we have.
Yes, and then
I
we
haven't
have
even
also,
seen it.
And then we have also the choice between core DNS and Kube DNS, which is kind of API. Those are add-ons which are driven by the API. So I think that add-ons are already in the API, but are not structured well.
Are we talking about API or, sorry, which API are we talking about?
The Kubernetes config.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we really want to have one deep dive or whatever discussion session, so we know what our SIG thinks about add-ons going forward before starting to muck with the config API. I think that is probably the most productive way forward. Sync with you, sync with others, like from SIG API machinery, maybe like and SIG architecture, office hours, or whatever, the broader community, before starting to checking code. I really have to check that PR up because, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we really do own. This is like one of the things that Cost Lifecycle really definitely owns. But yes, we should definitely get input from SIG architecture. I think would be the ones to figure out.
Well, I think we're kind of, there's certain jurisprudence where like we don't necessarily need buy-in, and I think it makes sense, but I think we should also, the only other group that I think of, API machinery should not be one of them, is the SIG apps group, because the overlap with apps and add-ons is really weirdly large and conflating to the point where I almost see almost all add-on management now underneath SIG apps. I
agree. I think that's certainly along the lines that I'm currently thinking, but I'm just, I've been chatting with some people internally and don't yet have anything concrete, but hopefully that's sort of what I'm looking at in the 1.12 timeframe, and definitely agree that SIG apps is a huge area of overlap. So yes, we should work with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a positive thing as well. Like they're also doing a lot of the work that otherwise we'd have to do. Like we'd have to figure out our own path, and if we can use the same path, then that makes life easier for everyone.
Yeah. Bootstrap tokens GA. I mean, that would be. I haven't made up my mind yet how to prioritize, but we kind of need to do it, as we said earlier. We're not in a good place with the structuring of the code of the Bootstrap tokens, because they're not exposed as they should be, and SIG API machinery really don't want to have stuff with this that is like this in between an explicit API group and type, and like just using a well-known constants for our secrets. It's something in between, and there's also like dependency issues that the API server should be able to access it. People using client Go should be able to access it. Kubernetes should be able to access it, etc., etc. So moving to, for example, Kate.io Bootstrap was a proposal, and I think we need to start executing on that.
Who's going to take ownership or lead on this? Working with the API machinery folks requires somebody to, it's a concerted effort that requires time.
Yeah, I've started the effort, but I'm not going to be able, probably not going to be able to roll it onto completion. I mean, I can guide and say what's needed and how and where and when, but not actually do all of the coding work.
I'm looking towards Liz, but I don't want to throw her under the bus because she's done a fair amount of digging in API machinery.
What's a little more?
That's the right attitude.
if you can dovetail with Liz so that you can hand off, but she's going to be out for a while.
Okay, well, I'll sync with her. Yeah, so, well, Ihor pinged me from CNCF, and we just concluded that, well, nobody hasn't done anything to the apt RPM repos yet. I'm just thinking, like, how do we want to prioritize? Is we just have to accept that we're the owners of the implicitly of the debs and RPMs and where they are and etc. And we need buy-in from SIG architecture and all that kind of stuff. But do we want to say that kubeadm is GA if we're using in our installation instructions and deprecated repo from Google?
So I have a question here, because the hosting of the debs and the RPMs as part of it, the installation instructions requires that precursor step. And there's nothing that precludes us from just creating a canonical container for a given release that does the installation via loopback hosted environment that has the binaries for the RPMs and the debs as part of the installation process. So you can do a yum install from a local container and it will be fine, right?
Yes.
You can set up a separate loopback repo to make this happen, right? And this gets us out of the business of one, trying to get a Googler to push to some location, and it's a terribly managed apt and yum repository. And two, it's just a container like everything else. We just treat it as such, to house the artifacts that we need to give to people who are bootstrapping.
Cool. So Tim, I did not follow the mental jump that was made there. Are you saying that we ask users to mount their file systems into a privileged container to install packages?
Yes. To do the yum install, to run a script that could do all the work for you.
So, and then the repository would be local to inside the container?
Yes.
Okay, so you're suggesting that for all of the distributions that we ask the user to use their CRI to run a container with their rootfs mounted in at some chroot in the container, and then to do a yum install from a local repo in there.
It would automate all of that. It'd basically be called do a script in this container, which is install the bits. And if it's a canonical version, then it would do apt. If it was a Red Hat based install, it would do whatever. It would do yum.
So
in any case,
yeah, does this sound like a good idea to somebody else? Because I don't know anything about this really. So
I see it as a complement, but not a replacement. So I still think we need the.
Then it needs to go to CNCF. We can no longer.
Yes.
Yeah.
It should, and I mean, getting that, I think a short, quick fix kind of thing is we make basal debs and RPMs just as the release RPMs, debs and RPMs, which is we have really, really small delta. We have closed that during the cycle. Then we just push the actual files to two locations. We push it to the Google thing and we push it to CNCF. And in our instructions, we start referencing, use this package, or use this apt repo from CNCF. And then we're kind of, then we have like this, okay, then we will support the Google repo for a year or something, but it still is more GA kind of, because we say that if you, going forward, you should use this CNCF backed repo. But for all this, we need steering committee, like buy-in and stuff, and it's like a political thing, yes. But everyone kind of agrees, so I just think we should realize that nobody else is going to do it. If we want to provide like this CNCF-backed apt repo, we want to support long-term, not short-term. Let's do it.
Is there anyone from CNCF? Sorry, go ahead. Hand raise.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is there anyone from CNCF that is working on, the problem as I understand it is the signing key. Is there anyone from CF that is working on how they would actually hold the signing key? And if so, like, can we just talk to them and figure out, or can we help them? Because is that the biggest issue?
No, I think like the only issue is just that nobody has started working or thinking or doing anything.
That's not true. Hawkins wants to get this out of Google's ownership, and he's been doing work behind the scenes, but it's not publicly visible.
Okay.
So I think one of the things that needs to happen is there needs to be this, I don't know, cross-functional group of people to make this happen in concert with the CNCF and make it public. But we're over time. I just noticed that now.
Yes.
So we should probably cut it.
Okay. Then I have like smaller things as well on my list, but
why don't we add it to the list on the doc here, and then maybe tomorrow we can go through prioritization of some of the items on the list. Does that seem like fair?
Yeah, let's do that. And we're already 5 minutes over time, so we should stop.
Right. Because we're over, I think we'll just cut it. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
Peace out. Cheers.